All right, we are live. Welcome to the show, Ziad. How you doing, man?
Great to be here, Tom. It is so great to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been a long time, and you're joining us from the great city of Seattle, Washington. Is that true, or where are you
Yeah,
nowadays?
yeah, that's right. Beautiful Seattle on Queen Anne. It is another gorgeous day out here in the middle of winter.
Love it, love it, love it. Now, you have a real interesting background in terms of your career. Obviously, you were the head of product for a unicorn startup, but you've also worked at big tech and small caps. Uh, and your career started out, or your beginnings are from Sweden. I recall also some time as a sniper. So tell us a little bit about your early history, and then we'll get up to present day.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born in Sweden. Um, my parents moved there from Iraq, and I was born there in kind of a suburb just outside of Stockholm. I spent, I think, my kind of early years just as any child is doing, just running around and not being fully aware and not having a great plan. But then at some point, I didn't live that far from one of the large shopping malls in Sweden, and at
Mm-hmm.
some point one of the stores there started having some early computers. And
Mm.
we would go in there, and kind of the first arcade machines showed up, and then these computers started showing up, and we'd go in there, and you'd kind of type on the keyboard and see what happened. There was a screen and everything. Um, and I eventually convinced my parents to buy me a computer. So I got a VIC-20, which was like a precursor to the Commodore 64.
Mm.
And we started typing in these programs. You'd buy a computer magazine and then type in the program and then run it and see what would happen. And so I kind of got fascinated by computers and, just typing things in BASIC and seeing what I could do, and modifying certain things. And so this was kind of the beginning of my interest in computers, but it was always more just fun and hobby than let's go make it a career.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I thought it could be a career was in high school, where the principal of the high school I went to asked me and one of my friends if we could help them with a scheduling problem. So they have the classic issue of parents and
Oh yeah,
teachers.
didn't Bill G and Balmer do something similar when
That
they
might
were
be
in school?
right. Maybe I've great people ahead of me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm
yeah.
guessing it's been the path for many people that've gone into computer science and product management. I think up until that point, my dad in particular had always dreamt about his children becoming doctors, and
Mm.
so it turns out my older brother probably got more of that pressure. So he is now a doctor, and my dad was like, yeah, you should be a doctor as well. Like, that is the only thing, that's the only
Mm.
profession that really matters. But in high school, we figured this out. We wrote this program. I did the algorithmic part, kind of the engine that figured out, okay, here are all the teachers, how do we minimize the slack in the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And then my friend wrote the front end, and then they paid us, not a huge amount of money, but they paid us. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. I can actually make money building computer software. And so as I graduated, I chose not to go to medical school. I applied and got into the computer science program in Stockholm. Um, and then during that experience, I kind of got to learn all the fundamentals. I really focused on kind of mathematics and algorithms. Those were my kind of focus areas as I was going through the program. Halfway through the education, I did my military service. So I went up to northern Sweden. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I ended up spending about 15 months in the Swedish military, two really, really dark winters. And so, like, the darkness and gloom in Seattle doesn't bother me. I was basically up at the Arctic Circle for 2 winters.
You're like, this is fantastic.
Oh, this is
Where's
amazing.
my sunscreen?
Oh, no, this is great. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I spent 2 winters up there. Incredible experience, just meeting people from completely different walks of life, and really, gave me a little bit of a break from the academic side and just
Mm-hmm.
let me think a little bit about what I wanted to do. I came back, finished up my program. I decided that I didn't want to go take a job as a programmer. I want to go start my own company. And so this was kind of just before the dot-com era. And I wasn't thinking about it as, I got to do something because it's a dot-com. But what I was seeing was mobile phones were really starting to take off.
Mm-hmm.
Sweden and Scandinavia in particular, if you remember, were some of the first places
Oh,
to
yeah.
like really high mobile penetration. So everybody had mobile phones. And you could just very easily figure out that in the future, this is going to be a better way to get a lot of information. A lot of services should be happening over mobile phones. And the one we thought about, because of the age group we were in was, restaurants, bars, what's happening in the city. That stuff should really be on a mobile phone because you're
Mm-hmm.
out and about and you want to be like, hey, I want to find a restaurant. I want to book a place. I want to
Yeah.
figure out what's good. I want to figure out what's new. I want to figure out what's playing. So we started a company called CitiKey. I became the CEO of that company. And then some of my friends and colleagues ran other parts of the company. That company had a, roughly 3-year run. It grew really quickly. We ended up being about 200 people, raised venture funding, high profile, but then crashed also, really, really painful.
Mm.
Um, I started a second company with a small group of friends. That company had moderate success and eventually sold. But I didn't really feel like I knew how to build a great tech company.
Mm.
So growing up, I had read these books about like the American tech scene, companies like Microsoft Secrets by Kuzumano, fascinating books about like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
like how are these people thinking? How are they figuring out all these strategies? How are they
Yeah.
about platforms and ecosystems? And so I decided I want to go to the US, figure out why the Americans are building great companies. Why aren't we building these great companies in Europe? Learn and then come back and start my next company.
Mm.
So I applied to business school. I got into HBS. I spent 2 years there, and then I got my dream internship, which was at Microsoft. Post internship, I joined Microsoft. I ended up not staying 2 years, but actually ended up staying 7 years. I had an incredible set of managers, incredible set of opportunities. Then after about 7 years, I wanted to go back, do something earlier stage. That's when I talked to you, Tom, and you
Mm-hmm.
asked me to come join you at Marchex. I was kind of just drawn in by, I think, the contrarian view of the company. We can speak more about that if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
I was drawn into the contrarian view, joined Marchex, had a great run there. Joined initially as running the product management team, eventually running all of product engineering, data science, and design. Just unbelievable talent, but also incredible challenges, which is
Mm.
like ideal circumstance to learn from. After 4 or 5 years, again, looking to do something new, I felt like my growth was stalling out a little bit. I wasn't learning as much. I talked to kind of a good friend, Dan, who was thinking about this company called Convoy. It was fascinating. I loved the idea. I fell in love with the idea. He convinced me the timing was right. People in trucks now had cell phones, and you could finally have kind of a compute platform inside all the trucks without spending millions of dollars on hardware. I joined Convoy about a little over a year after it was founded, and then I was with the company for the past 5 years, basically from about 50 people to 1,200 people, and through several rounds of funding and just incredible hyper growth and revenue, economics, organization, and so on. And about a month ago, I decided that I want to take on a new challenge, and I love the experience at Convoy. The only thing bigger than logistics is healthcare. Logistics is about 5 trillion a year. Healthcare is about 10 trillion a year. It has many of the same characteristics. Lots of kind of deep challenges that ultimately will get solved by technology, but there are lots of steps between here and there. And I love the team, love the product, and decided to make the jump. And this time as chief operating officer.
All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with the move to Microsoft, the dream company at that time. You know, the dominant technology leader in the industry. Obviously still one of the leaders, but at that time I felt like there were even there were less kind of comparables to Microsoft.
Yeah.
And when you got there and you stayed there for several years, was it all that you had expected, or what were some things that you learned about how these Americans were building trillion-dollar tech companies?
Well, you got to say the Americans certainly think big and dream big. Like that was the first thing that struck me, which was basically a plan wasn't interesting unless it could be $1 billion business.
Mm-hmm.
Like that wasn't necessarily the mindset that I'd seen elsewhere, and so I kind of like that. That kind of fascinated me. I think there's some pros and cons to that because sometimes you don't know what's going to be $1 billion business. You know that you have some early product market fit. Kind of customers love what you're doing, but it's hard to kind of project out. Um, so, I mean, I'd say like there was a lot of rigor, there was a lot of thinking. The teams generally were incredibly smart. But Microsoft, I quickly figured out, wasn't one company. It was, pockets of different managers with different styles, different ways of operating. And as you know, sometimes those teams worked really well across the company, and sometimes there was a lot of tension between different parts of the company. So what I really sought out during my time there were just incredible managers that I could learn from. My goal at Microsoft was really like my goal the whole time was just to learn and kind of observe organizations, observe how teams do planning, how they structure things, where they're running into problems, observe management style. I really saw it as an education more
Mm-hmm.
than kind of like a career. Of course, it was both, and I ended up doing well and being lucky and getting some really good projects to work on. But yeah, those were kind of some of the things I observed internally and how I tried to navigate my career.
You mentioned that part of the reason you stayed a little longer than expected was because you had the benefit of some great managers and observing this leadership, the different approaches to leadership. What are some things that have still stuck with you to this day in terms of things that you're like, okay, yeah, that's a really clever way to do it, or that's a really effective way to lead?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last manager I worked for was somebody I really liked, uh, a gentleman called Ryan Gavin. So he was actually on the marketing side, and I was about to leave, but I talked to him, and he kind of convinced me to, try marketing for a year.
Hmm.
Up until that point, I had done mainly, I'd say, product management. And so I joined the marketing organization, and that's actually where I met Dan Lewis and many other people that subsequently joined us at Convoy and at Marchex. Um, I think like taking that lens of, Amazon talks about it as working back from the customer or kind of the press release, but really taking the
Mm-hmm.
lens of the customer and the story, and then getting tightly aligned with the kind of engineering team and the product team on what we're going to build. That is a really, really powerful idea, and I think many people that work in product management would benefit from having deeper experience in marketing, in storytelling, because a lot of product management is this. How do we? There's so many different paths for us.
Mm-hmm.
How do we figure out which is the right one? And then how do you tell the story internally, externally to kind of rally everybody and get them excited about it? And so that is both, I'd say, strategy and marketing are deep components of effective product management. So I think that experience was, very formative. But I had many like that within the company. I had several other ones that were, really strong managers that helped guide me and help me think about different problems.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation in that there are many cultures where it starts with engineering at the center, and then you've got product management, um, and then marketing is kind of like at the end of this kind of you know conveyor belt or workflow.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is like that storytelling, that customer obsession, that narrative. actually should come up further upstream. It's not like, well, we built this cool thing, now find a way to sell it.
Right.
It's something more formative.
Yeah, and it's also absolutely, and I think there are roles, there are kind of role definitions, but the best organizations I've been part of is where it's more fluid. It's where the
Mm-hmm.
engineers are deeply involved in what the vision is and where we should be going. And the talent they have is applied to coming up with, like, okay, here are some of the big innovations we can go after. Here's what's really going to get customers excited. And it's when the marketing team and the product team is really engaging with engineering, and it's kind of a deep collaborative environment. So I've really tried to model that in all the organizations I've built subsequently, which is how do you get the team to feel as one team with a shared mission where everybody's contributing ideas and getting excited about where we're going, as opposed to this, even if you're running agile, it can sometimes feel like a waterfall in terms of the culture inside the
Mm-hmm.
company, where one function is handing over agile artifacts to the next step. I think you need, whatever you want to call it, but think of it as like an agile culture combined with like agile workflow. Um,
Yeah.
I think if you set it up that way, you often get better ideas. Some of the best ideas at Convoy were not ones that I came up with or anyone in product management. They were ideas that came from other parts of the organization.
Yeah.
Things
Very
that,
cool. Let's talk a little bit about the Marchex years. It's definitely at that time, at least, it was a contrarian kind of bit of a turnaround. Um, really capable people, um, and it grew, but it probably didn't. It didn't kind of hit the heights that maybe a lot of us wanted. And I'm curious, like, what in retrospect, like, what are some of the lessons learned or insights that you kind of picked up from that experience?
oh man. Well, Tom, I mean, I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed that you hired me into the company. I'm like, I'm gonna work with Tom, and then you leave, what, 3 months
Was
after I,
it was it that short?
was it shorter? Was it a week?
I thought it was a little longer, but something.
Maybe a
Yeah, it
little.
was definitely. Yeah.
Um, I mean, I would say Marchex, definitely from a talent perspective, like that company was stacked with talent.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Um, I've been really fortunate to work with some incredibly talented people from Marchex later, kind of in my
Mm-hmm.
careers. I talked to, it just so happens, like in the past week, for various reasons, I've talked to 4 of my direct reports from Marchex just in
Mm.
the past week, and it's great catching up with them. It's like such an incredible team, and they're doing such incredible things. Obviously, I think if they join me at H1, they can potentially do even more incredible things. But I'm also, sharing perspective I have as they're growing in their careers on. So they don't make the same mistake. So they're asking me like, "Hey, I'm in this circumstance. I think you were in
Mm-hmm.
that Marchex or Convoy. What are you doing here?" But anyway, yeah, I think in terms of Marchex, your question is like, why didn't it reach the heights that it could have? I think market matters, and it took a while to figure out. But even though we had a great team and we had some real breakthroughs on kind of technology leadership, the structure of the market, I think, was not that favorable. And I know the team subsequently has been doing a lot of things to kind of expand the TAM and try to change the market dynamics. But
Mm-hmm.
at least when I was there, my assessment was that there wasn't really a strong moat around the business. And many of our customers, they just wanted the kind of basic functionality. And you had about a dozen companies that were all offering quite equivalent functionality for the basics. And the
Mm-hmm.
advanced stuff where you could differentiate didn't really matter. And so those dynamics, relatively small market, many competitors, undifferentiated product, naturally lead to very tough economics, where every cycle people come to you and say, "Hey, Tom, love working with you, love your team,
Mm-hmm.
but these other people are willing to cut the prices by 10%. What can you do? We'd love to stay with you. What are you going to do?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, by contrast, if I think about Convoy, and one of the things that attracted me to the company was that when I first talked to Dan, instead of thinking about a market that's like, okay, maybe it's a couple hundred million, maybe it's a billion, Dan comes out and tells me like, yeah, trucking alone in the US is $1 trillion. And it's super inefficient. And there's going to be lots of ways to differentiate it. And I'm just thinking like, okay, like now if we can just replicate the quality of team we had at Marchex with the quality of opportunity, some really great things are going to happen. And so that's what I try to do. But I think structurally, the market conditions were really tough. And I think we made some good dents in, how to think about the business, how to think about running the teams. But we weren't able to make a big enough dent. But I will say that working in tough situations are probably the place where I've learned the most. Whereas when it's easy and you like walk home from work and it's, wow, this was an easy day, everything is looking great. I don't know, like if you're really learning that much. And Marchex was just an unbelievable learning opportunity for me, and I think helped set me up for kind of future roles.
Yeah, I think for all of us, we all benefit from various periods of that Swedish kind of extreme experience up in the north.
The cold and darkness.
Yeah. I mean, I think, my view on the Marchex stuff is, I think part of it, I totally agree with everything you said around the addressable market. I also think it is a bit of a symptom of a publicly traded company that is really not set up to make the kind of long bets that take a while and are a bit riskier, because there are expectations every quarter. And that's I think that contributed to kind of the physics of the types of investments you could make and the kind of time horizons you could explore.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I think we all learned a ton from that experience.
It's a great point. I agree. Being a public company definitely added extra constraints to how we had to operate. I think a lot of startups today really dream about like, let's go public one day. But it does bring in a different set of stakeholders with different time horizons than kind of private market investors. And there is something amazing about building a company and taking risk in the private market.
Yeah.
But I think there's also some value in being public and kind of getting the discipline and the pressure of like really tightening up the machine. And so I think there's value in both, but you don't want to be too early. I agree. That is really painful. That is really hard.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some public companies, like if they have a core business that's just throwing off cash, then you can do a lot of other things to kind of think about the future. But if you don't have that really dialed in and you're kind of on the hook every quarter to beat estimates, like that's a tough hand to play.
So it sounds like you're not deep into the SPACs.
No, I mean, I don't know as much about how that works. I mean, part of me just being old school is like, wait a minute, that seems like cheating. But I get that there's a lot of them going on, and then they seem to be doing okay, afterwards. I do feel like it's a little bit of, that roadshow and the traditional IPO path. I felt like forces companies to really have a strong S1 and, come up against a lot of scrutiny. And then, these SPACs, you just wake up and like, oh, such and such is public. How did that happen fast, kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know enough about it. What's your view on them?
The thing I worry about is that it's definitely a bet you're making. It's kind of like you have some companies that are almost in the R&D phase. They don't actually have any revenue, but they're going to a big market. They have a smart team. They're in an area that's exciting. For example, there are quite a few companies in the kind of autonomous vehicle type space. I think the problem is the challenge is that as the market swings around, or as you're one of these early stage companies, potentially even at the R&D stage, it's really public, like where your stock price is every day. And having to go to your employees, and I experienced this at Marchex, and people come to you and say like, hey, Tom, why is our stock down 30% today? What's going on? You're like, well, I don't know. Let's just do our job. Let's go build the company. And then, it's up, 30% the next day, but it just swings around a lot. And so I think it may also be an internal distraction. So there is, part of it, I think, is it the right time? Can you actually predict out and hit your numbers? And is it a good time? But then there's also just the internal distraction I think you get from trying to have those conversations and trying to make sure people have the right long-term mindset internally as well as externally. It's easy. It's very easy for people to snap to the short-term mindset internally if there's a short-term mindset externally that's kind of guiding the price of your company.
Yeah. Tell us about the Convoy experience. I mean, that was and is a $1 trillion opportunity, and the company seems to be on fire and growing and growing and growing. Was it hard, or did you find like a huge tailwind and manage to take full advantage, or a little bit of both? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so I joined Convoy in, let's see, September of 2016, and I spent the last 5 years there. It was definitely challenging. I would say the company has had unbelievable success, and I think it's going to have continued unbelievable success. But every year brought its own challenges. And you can think about it as, the challenges come on multiple dimensions, which one is you're trying to learn things about the business and solve all these hard problems, many of which other people in the industry thought couldn't be solved. Like we would have people say like, you can never automate a truck brokerage. It's fundamentally human to human communication. Okay. Like Michael Jordan says, we took that personally and we're like, okay, we're going to go do this. Let's go see if we can do it. And so we had to go and really crack a lot of really deep problems in this space. And each year there were its own challenges. But alongside that, the company grew from when I joined about 50 people to over 1,000 people. When you go through hyperscaling, it's not just about maintaining the culture. The mechanisms that work when you are 10 people and can all get in the room don't work when you're 100 people. They don't work when you're 1,000 people. So you're both innovating on the product side, but then you also have to innovate on how the machine actually operates. And both of these things are going on in parallel. So yeah, it was super challenging, but it was also, probably the most fun I've ever had in my career. Especially I'd say the early years, the kind of the first, I'd say first 3-4 years, like I've never had more fun. Every day I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy and so hard and so much fun. I wouldn't be anywhere else.
What do you think were the hardest times? What was the hardest kind of challenge that you had to figure out?
I mean, I think that, there's this, the phrase product market fit, I think is well known. It's when you've built something your customers really want and things are just kind of going like crazy. But what I think is an interesting framework is that there is often a way that you design your business that creates this hole that you have to dig out of while you're getting product market fit. And so if you think about marketplace businesses in particular, the theory of marketplace businesses and networks tends to be that things improve with scale or density. And so you want to do everything in the beginning to get to scale or density. And you may have heard the phrase, do things that don't scale about startups. In the beginning, it doesn't matter if it doesn't scale. You just want to deliver something to your customers, even if you're doing a bunch of manual things on the back end. That's okay because you're just trying to get product market fit. You're just trying to get to the place where customers love your product. And then over time, you can go fix those other issues. You can go automate and you can build your machine learning algorithms and improve your software and so on. But that behavior of doing things in the beginning that you know are going to be non-scalable later on does create a hole that you have to dig out of. And that hole tends to be economic in shape, which is, okay, customers love your thing, it's growing like crazy, but your unit economics probably aren't where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this in lots of companies, right? You see this in companies like Facebook. After they went public, it was like, okay, yeah, the company is growing like crazy because they really focused on growth. But what's the business model going to be? So this happens in lots of companies. Amazon as well. Making growing like crazy. Will they ever make money?
Mm-hmm.
So with so with Convoy, we had the same thing. We're growing like crazy, and then at some point we're like, okay, yeah, we know we can grow this. Now, how do we tighten up the unit economics? How do we really get to that? And I think of that as one stage is product market fit, and then the second stage is product economic fit. Can you actually
Mm-hmm.
economics to work while having your product be something that your customers love? And that forces you to change a bunch of behaviors internally. Not only are you redirecting the teams, but the metrics you're looking at to measure your success change. Instead of looking at just top line revenue, you're now looking at gross margin, the efficiency of your operational teams. So that was kind of a very big pivot, and the company did unbelievable work in a very short time frame to get the economics to an attractive place. But that pivot in the company, I think we really had to spend a lot of energy explaining, like, why are we changing the North Star metrics of the company? Why is this the thing that is now important? Whereas we've been telling you for the last 3 years that this other thing is how
Mm-hmm.
we should measure our success. So that required, I think, not just having the right talent in place, rethinking how we operate and all the North Stars, but also kind of culturally trying to bring everybody along inside the company. And now a bunch of that happened as COVID was hitting.
Mm.
So, the supply chains, and it's been in the news recently, um, they've been chaotic over the last 2 years. And so, we built this company that has solved a bunch of really interesting problems and that, drivers and shippers love. Now we're really tightening up the unit economics, making good progress. And in the middle of that, we have total volatility and crisis in the supply chains. That was kind of challenging, managing through that. But I think we got there, and it was, I think, just fantastic learning.
In the hindsight, do you still agree that it was the right sequence to start with product market fit, get that figured out, and then worry about the product economic fit later? Or do you think, like, when's the right time to include that second piece?
I think it was the right decision. There were other companies that focused on getting both of those to work in concert.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they, I think, struggled to kind of keep up with us, both on the innovation side. I think we outpaced, many of the other companies in terms of innovation, as well as growth of the company and position of the company. Trying to figure out, like, exactly, like, when you flip the switch and when you redirect the company,
Mm.
I think we kind of got a little bit lucky. Like, maybe we were off by a quarter or so, but I think we got it pretty right. Um, I don't know if there was another choice that would get Convoy to the position it is today. Like, you kind of think about, okay, if we had run it in a different way, would we be further ahead or further behind? I think we're pretty close to optimal. I've tried a bunch of times to, like, rethink, okay, if we had done this or that
Mm.
instead, would we have arrived at a different point? I think we got it pretty close to right. There are other things. Uh, there are other things where I learned a lot, and I'd probably do those differently. But I think that part of it, I'm really proud of the team broadly and the management team for thinking through and figuring out how we navigated.
What was the critical factor or the tipping point where you felt like, okay, we could continue to grow this top line and just be the biggest, expand our lead, but no, we need to start making some money, or get closer to profitability. What was did you hit a certain milestone and you're like, okay, now we're big enough. Now let's start tightening it up? Or how did you think about that?
Um, I think it was just conversations that, we had within the management team. And, we always paid, like, I want to be clear, like, we always had kind of guardrails in place and said, we want to be aggressive with growth,
Mm-hmm.
but also smart. Like, we never want to dig a hole that we can't dig ourselves out of. Um, I think there were certain new incubations that we were developing that hit some real speed bumps because of the economics. Some things that we made, I'd say some big bets on, but at some point, they were getting a little bit deeper in the hole than we wanted them to, and we were like, okay, can we dig ourselves out of this? That was kind of the moment where, like, okay, it's probably worth tightening it up. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's take 12 months, tighten everything up, and then go hit the gas again. It's not like, the problem is there isn't any, like, red light that flashes that you can just look at and say, okay, now is the time. It is kind of nuanced, and it's both an internal conversation as well as a view on where do we think external markets are going to be
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, like, future fundraising and appetite. And so that's the balance you have to strike.
Yeah, I'm guessing there might have been some investors or folks in the investment community who might have advocated saying, hey, this is a $1 trillion market, just keep growing, and
Yeah.
if you win this, you'll have decades to make money. And then there are probably some saying like, hey, we put in a lot of money here, like it's where I need a line of sight to profitability at some point. And it was that a hard conversation, or was there kind of consensus from the investor community
No,
as well?
there's never consensus. If you ask, if you ask 10 people, they're going to have 10 different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I one thing that impressed me with the founders and kind of the management team was that they generally, definitely listened to other people, were kind of great at taking in information, but made the final call. And
Mm-hmm.
what wasn't like, okay, here's what this person is saying. They are senior and authoritative. Let's do what they're saying. It was like, they might be right, but actually, we still believe our point of view, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
go for it. There were several moments like that. I mean, starting with keeping the company very focused on specific segments and specific categories and specific geos.
Mm-hmm.
There were lots of conversation about, like, which markets to get into, which truck types to get into, and internally, I think part of the formula was, let's stay really focused. It's such a big market anyway, and let's not sprawl.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be really successful in one category and then expand from there, which is kind of the approach we took. But there were other people that advocated for, like, more a go everywhere as quickly as
Land
possible.
grab, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and there's people are saying this because they're pattern matching against other things they've seen. But for every pattern, there's going to be counter patterns in other companies. The circumstances are so particular to
Mm-hmm.
your company that it's dangerous to pattern match too aggressively.
Let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of product management. What was your approach to sort of the PM job at Convoy? What was the purpose of a PM there? What were some of the key artifacts or outcomes you were looking to get from your product team?
Yeah, I would say, you know, Convoy has an incredibly strong product management team. Um, I modeled it a lot after things I learned actually at Marchex. Marchex had an incredibly strong product management team as well. If I look at Convoy, what I really wanted the PMs to do within the company was, and it's a delicate balance, but it's a mix of, one, making sure there's a clear vision, clear direction. So one thing I interviewed very deeply for was vision and strategy, and we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about, like, some of the techniques we used for that if you want to. Um, but also people that could really pull out the best ideas from all their peers. So I wanted to run it. It's a little bit of a dichotomy because on the one hand, you want people that are really driven and really pushing hard and can kind of crystallize a vision and a plan and strategy and then drive that. On the other hand, like the best PMs are also not dictators. There are people who get the best ideas out of the engineers, the scientists, the data scientists, the marketers, the customer support, and really like, okay, we're going to build this. I want people to contribute, and they're very open to it. And so that was the ideal profile I was looking for. People that could do both of those things and could do both of them very well. Ultimately, the role of the PM, as I saw it, was get everybody to contribute, but then make sure we have one plan and make sure we execute that plan very cleanly and very well.
Well, let's maybe as we wrap up, talk about how you would figure out what candidate was able to take this hybrid approach and have a very strong point of view and thoughtful strategic lens, but also bring out the best in people. And sounds like also disagree and commit when needed. How do you
Yeah.
figure that out in a 45-minute, GVC remote meeting?
Yeah, exactly. It is definitely tricky. I wouldn't figure all of it out. So we would interview based on different competencies. One area that I would focus on was one of our values, which was think big at Convoy. So think big is effectively strategy and vision. And so one question I really like to ask, also because I found the answers so fascinating, is tell me about something you've thought deeply about, and let's discuss what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
And I really wanted to see if people could think about an area, have a lot of original ideas, think about not just the first order effects, which is autonomous vehicles are going to come. Okay, you will have more time in the backseat of your car. But what else happens? It's like, well, red light cameras probably aren't going to capture as many cars speeding. A lot of cities depend on traffic fines for funding. Like, what are all the second, third, fourth order effects? Like, people could really, really think about it and have unique points of view. And so I would ask them about, through that lens of like, think about what's going to happen in the future, see like how far they could go down the path, like where they started getting lost. If they could also translate that into what would make a good business, like who's going to be successful in that world? Like if what you believe is true, which companies will win, which companies will not win? If you were at one of those companies that's going to struggle, what would you have to do today? If you have $1 million to place bets, how would you invest? Like just going really, really deep into that conversation. So that was kind of a core question I used to explore like people's vision and really thinking a couple of steps ahead. And then of course I'd ask them about like the toughest strategic problems that they had worked on and just dig into. I like that mix of like hypothetical combined with, and what have you actually done? That I felt like gave me a rounded out view on that. And then on the other side, I did have people from different disciplines, and I would ask them specifically, like, how is this person going to work with your discipline? How inclusive are they going to be? How have they got? Who are the best people they've worked with? To kind of get that sense of like, do they partner well and get good ideas out of the rest of them, kind of the rest of the organization?
Awesome. Last question before we wrap up, Ziad. If you could go back maybe 10, 15 years into your career and give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself?
You're saying besides joining you earlier at Marchex? Yeah, I would say like, I started these companies right after college and they kind of failed. And so I went from probably taking on too much risk very early on in my career to becoming a little bit risk averse, which is, and I think I wasn't well calibrated. And I think there was a time where I should probably have taken on more risk again earlier, because really the risk in our industry is really low. Like we are fortunate that, we get to work in jobs that are generally really, really fun. We get paid too much for our jobs. It's, definitely covers rent and food and all of that. And so, like, the worst case scenario of going to an earlier stage company and things not working out is that you go to another cushy job.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I got trapped a little bit, because when I was at Microsoft, I came in with the mindset of, like, I'm here to learn, and I'm here
Mm-hmm.
to really enjoy myself and really observe and be like an anthropologist. But then
Mm-hmm.
at some point I was like, okay, I'm at level X. How do I get to level X plus one? And that kind of, like, it started creeping in. And when that was creeping into my mind, and I actually consciously observed it, that's when I stepped away. It's like, okay, I've been here 7 years. I'm having fun, but it's getting a little bit too easy, and I'm not challenged in the same ways. I need to go do something else. And so that would be the thing I tell myself, kind of finding that balance of risk and optimizing for happiness rather than levels or kind of compensation.
I know I said it was the last question, but we have a Marchex alum in
Okay,
the
who is it?
live stream, Wes Wu,
Oh, awesome.
who says, I will always remember the Swiss Army sniper stories. Question: in vetting PMs on their capability and chance of success, how do you approach unconventional folks, new to product or tech, versus the people with PM kind of all the way down the resume?
Yeah. Wes, first of all, I have such fondness for anybody who's worked at Marchex, so it is great to hear from you. Um, yeah, I would say that I love this question, because I think that one thing that we really figured out at Convoy, which I'm hoping to do at other companies, is that oftentimes you have people with incredible talents and potentially unique perspectives that would benefit from being inside of the PM organization, and you can kind of cross train them. And so
Mm-hmm.
we hired, some of our best PMs were people that worked in operations at Convoy. And what you get when you work in operations at Convoy is you're really close to the customer, right? Whereas sometimes as a PM, depending on how the company is organized, you may be a step removed and you may not be hearing from customers all the time. So if you can bring in that DNA, which is really close to the customer, really understand the problems with the tooling and what's happening on a day-to-day basis in the business, you can make your product org much more kind of customer oriented and bring it much closer to the market. And then you can give these people, you can start bringing them in and start building the product skills, kind of pair them with a senior or principal product manager, and then start giving them bigger and bigger responsibilities. This is something we did, I think, quite successfully at Convoy. And, alongside hiring incredible PMs, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of at Convoy, is the fact that we've brought a bunch of people in that I'm sure are going to have incredible careers. I also think that, there's a lot of discussion about, diversity in kind of technical roles and technical disciplines. It's really hard to tell your recruiting team, no matter how great they are, and we had a great one at Convoy, and they are still great. Let's just try to get, hire more diverse people, because fundamentally the numbers in the industry are what they are. I think the game is really to change the numbers, to change the industry numbers. And other disciplines within the company tend to have ratios that are
Mm-hmm.
that are not as skewed. And so if you can hire from those pools, not only you're bringing this incredible DNA, I think, and opening up these opportunities for people, you're also addressing some of those long-term structural issues in kind of an industry.
Makes a ton of sense, and totally agree. I think bringing folks from other disciplines that especially have a lot of contact with customers is such a win for the product team.
Yeah.
And to your point, they're often come from a variety of backgrounds that we don't typically see in the product management discipline. And so you kind of accomplish two goals at once. Ziad, it's been a pleasure. Only true PM nerds would get up on a Saturday morning to spend an hour talking about it. So I appreciate you coming on and if you're seeing this live or on replay, don't forget to like and share it out. And hopefully we can get you back on. You know, it might be fun after you've had some time in H1 to think about product lessons and insights that you've picked up to complement the Convoy, Marchex, Microsoft experience as well.
Absolutely, Tom. Hey, thanks for inviting me. I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, once we get through whatever wave we're in now, I can't wait to reconnect over lunch, and hopefully we can trade notes about the future of healthcare as well, which is another topic.
Yeah, let's do it, buddy.
All
Have a
right,
good.
take care.
Okay.
Bye.